Start your day with It's the Business.
Here's Phil Dobbie.
Well, today we explore further the Facebook news ban in Australia. Which side are you on?
Well, what today's events do confirm for all Australians is the immense market power of these media digital giants.
Well, one of those immense media digital giants, Google, which had threatened to pull out completely from Australia, now has signed a deal. But is it good news for journalism?
This is really bad news for the small publishers, because basically it's given a lot of money to News Corp and Nine and Seven West, who are the number 3 publisher in Australia.
Paul Wallbank joins me from Oz later on. Plus, when the going gets tough, Ted Cruz gets going.
They said, "Look, why don't we take a trip? Let's go somewhere where it's not so cold."
Like Mexico. Incredible. We're going to hear a classic example of what not to say if you don't want to get roasted in the midst of a deep freeze. It's Friday, the 19th of February, 2021. Good morning.
And now, it's the business, making sense of it all with Phil Dobbie.
What they're effectively saying to Australians is, you will not find content on our platform which comes from an organisation which employs professional journalists, which has editorial policies, which has fact-checking processes. They're effectively saying you will not find information that meets those standards of accuracy on our site. That seems a very surprising position.
That's a very nice spin on it all, isn't it? From Australian Communications Minister Paul Fletcher yesterday on this ban on Australian news content by Facebook, both within Australia and from anyone trying to post links to Australian news sites anywhere else in the world. If you try and pick up an article from the Sydney Morning Herald and post it this morning, you won't be able to do it because this is all over a dispute. The government wants to introduce a law that would have them pay the publishers whenever a Facebook user posts a link to that comment. Now, this is clearly because of a chummy deal with the Murdoch press. Otherwise, why would they be so intent on pushing through legislation that it's hard to see how this is helping the principles of journalism? It's more to do with money. And on the money front, Google, who were ready to pull out of Australia altogether because of this new law, are now in the good books. They're being heralded as the heroes by the Australian government because they've reached a deal to pay news publishers, well, in particular, actually, let's be honest, News Corp, for the content that they aggregate in the news section of their website. So if you go to news.google.com, for example, you'll see there's a whole load of stories that they have chosen. I'm not sure how they're following the principles of journalism. It's being curated by Google. And no word on how much they're going to be paying News Corp for this and whether this overrides this law in Australia that would still mean, presumably, Google would have to pay for clicks to news sites from search results. Does that mean that if they've reached a deal, they are going to prioritise those sites that they've got to deal with? Who knows? But they've gone from hostility to deep love and mutual respect, it seems. The press statement from News Corp's global headquarters quotes the CEO of News Corp, thanking the fervent, unstinting support of Rupert and Lachlan Murdoch. You've got to suck up to the bosses, haven't you? And that's one way of doing it. For many years, this is a quote from him, for many years we were accused of tilting at tech windmills. But what was a solitary campaign, a quixotic quest, has become a movement, and both journalism and society will be enhanced. Well, it's nice to know, isn't it? That's all right then. Pay some money, look for some revenue sharing opportunities, which I'm sure is involved in all of this, and the problem is solved. That's the enemy sorted out and the money sorted out, although Google still has that news page curated by Google, and I'm not quite sure how democratic that is. At least with Facebook, the sharing of content is chosen by the users. You actually can't get any more democratic than that. You know, if you see a story in the Sydney Morning Herald, you want to share it with your mates, then that is pretty democratic. But I wonder if the Australian government are missing the point on this. We'll have more on that with Paul Wallbank fairly shortly on It's the Business Now. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer has a plan at last.
There's an opportunity here to think creatively, to build on the spirit of solidarity we've seen in the last year, and to forge a new contract with the British people. The British people invest in rebuilding an economy that's more secure, and the government provides financial security for millions of people, many of whom have saved for the first time.
Recovery bonds is what he's talking about, the idea that we are going to use the money that's been saved up during the pandemic. You can now spend that on bonds sold on a retail basis by the Bank of England, presumably, and that's going to offset any government debt that's been built up, arguably, so the government can spend more. But I might be missing something on this because the Bank of England has already bought up £300 billion worth of bonds in the last year, mostly government bonds, which is government debt scooped up by the central bank. It's all new money for the economy. New money. I wonder, what Keir Starmer is talking about is taking existing money sitting in people's bank accounts that he wants people to switch to bonds rather than encouraging them spending and seeing more money circulating in the broader economy. I'm not quite sure Keir Starmer has thought this through. Maybe he's looking at the olden days when we issued war bonds, but in those, it was a very different world. I mean, money was tied to the gold reserve. There wasn't the same flexibility that we now have with what's called fiat money. In other words, we can produce as much of the stuff as we want. When the US government did introduce bonds, the Liberty Bond in World War I, most of them were actually bought up by banks rather than individuals. So has he thought this through?
This is bold. It's innovative. And it's an example of the active, empowering government I believe is needed.
But will it work? Maybe a better approach actually would be that local authorities issue bonds, because it's not so easy for them to raise money. They are basically indebted to the government plus whatever they get from local taxes and parking fines and that sort of stuff. But if they could issue bonds backed by the Bank of England, so you might not be keen to buy from your local council because you might think you'll never get the money back. But if it's backed by the Bank of England, you could invest knowing that it's safe. And those local authorities could use it to build up essential services and new schemes from the ground up wherever you are. You could invest in your local community. You could get a Tadcaster bond, for example. Or you might decide you want to invest in another area where you're buying a holiday home. You could buy a Winchester bond, for example. Or if you're in Essex, obviously this had to come out. You could buy a Basildon bond, couldn't you? Getting us to buy bonds to fund government, though. Well, I think the Bank of England is already doing that. And look, if you want an opportunity as well for retail investors, why not just promote the premium bonds? Because they're already there. Just make them work a bit harder for people. Maybe you could improve the chance of winning. Maybe also pay a bit of interest. They are retail bonds that exist. But really, we don't want people buying bonds. We really want people to spend. I wonder what's happening. What alternate universe are we in where the Tory government is overspending like crazy and the Labour Party wants to launch a new investment vehicle? What has gone wrong with the world? We have to assume it's not gone down terribly well for Keir Starmer because, well, it's been largely ignored, at least on the front page of the newspapers. There's a bit of coverage in the Independent. It says, "Does Starmer have an economic plan?" ? So you can tell where that's heading. The Eye, it's not the main headline, but inside, new partnership between Labour and business to create fairer society. Nice words, but really, I mean, they incidentally, just moving off that story now, they've got a graph showing the attitude towards ending lockdowns. This is the front page of the Eye, and sending kids back to school on the 8th of March. 52% support it, 28% oppose it, and half are reluctant to relax rules on household meeting before May. We'll find out, of course, what the Prime Minister's roadmap is for us all to get out of all of this on Monday sometime. But the Times has a headline, "Hope for Holidays." And it's got a very large picture of Mars. Now, they do this sometimes. They run the headline and then they've got a photograph, and the photograph relates to a much smaller headline, which in this case is the landing of the Perseverance on the Mars surface last night. Earth time, we all watched it at our house. Hugo, my son, had it all streamed across from YouTube. But it does look like the Times, they are suggesting that one way out of escaping COVID-19, only takes 7 months to get there, is to go to Mars. Start packing now. Meanwhile, good news, UK confidence. It's jumped to its highest level in 5 years ahead of the announcement on Monday. The Business Confidence Index, which is compiled by the ICAEW accountancy body from a survey of 1,000 firms, shows confidence for the year ahead rising from -19 in the fourth quarter of last year to +10 in the first quarter of this year. Although you have to assume this year's got off to a pretty bad start, so it will bounce back, but not in Q1 with or without Starmer bonds. It's going to be Q2 or Q3 before we really see things picking up. Now, he may not be going to Mars, but talking about people who need to get packing, well, Texas Senator Ted Cruz got packing. He's been escaping the blackouts and freezing temperatures that have hit his state where the power grid has been wholly inadequate. He went for a short holiday in Mexico. This is him trying to talk his way out of the situation. Rather badly, I think.
We left yesterday. The plan had been to stay through the weekend with the family. That was the plan. And I have to admit, it was... The last week's been tough on a lot of folks. When our power went out, we were initially, we had power longer than many. And in fact, a lot of our girls' friends came over. We were hosting them for dinner, and they were at our house because we had power and no one else did. And then the power went out right as we were starting to sit down for dinner, and was out for 2 days. The first night we had a bit of what I would say a sleepover, where we had kids huddled in sleeping bags and blankets and wrapped up, and no lights and no heat, so everyone had flashlights. We had candles going. That's an experience Texans all across our state had. We were... By the second day, we were clustered around the fireplace as the only source of heat, and so huddled up in jackets and by the fireplace. And our girls, when they got the news that school was canceled this week, they said, "Look, why don't we take a trip? Let's go somewhere where it's not so cold."
Yeah, why not? Mexico, in fact. If you can afford it, why not? Even if you are in charge of the state which is going through all of this, why not just leave? That was incredible. That was Ted Cruz apologizing, by the way, but it does sound like he is just dipping himself even deeper into that unusually deep Texas snow, doesn't it? But he does describe what Texas has been going through. It sounds absolutely horrendous, being the state freezing and the power going off, so you've got no way of heating yourself. There's stories about people having to burn their furniture to keep warm. So there we are. That's what happens if you privatize power. Oh, we've done that too, haven't we? Shame about that. Now, some other headlines in the papers this morning. Over 40s to get jabs by the end of March. That's the front of the Daily Mail. It is moving very quickly, isn't it? This campaign, which, we gave it a name on this podcast. Go Jab It. But it's not been picked up anywhere else. But, not too late for you to use that one, Boris. The Daily Express today. New law must stop vile trolls preying on our young. Okay. The Daily Star. The Daily Star lives in a world, doesn't it, where COVID never existed. Their front page today. Ant and Dec wrapped by the Mexicans over joke pic. Don't flash your maracas is the headline, because they've been shown using comedy maracas to promote their new TV show, which is basically it's all been dubbed as a lazy stereotype by someone or other. I'm not quite sure who. If I turn to page 9, if I was that interested, we'd find out. A lot of comments in the papers today about Facebook, The Guardian, Facebook under fire around the world over Australian ban. The Metro, hashtag delete Facebook worldwide campaign to ditch social media bully. I'm very surprised that Facebook is seen as the bully in all of this. But, you can see how important it all is. And look, the number of Australians, I'm not quite sure how many Australians get their news from Facebook. This is why this is important. I can tell you what it is here, because there was an Ofcom study in 2019 that concluded half of us get our news from social media, not exclusively, of course, but it is a growing influence on how we are informed of what's going on. And it is a source for many of us, more of a source, in fact, than listening to the radio or buying a newspaper. The top 3 news sources in the UK, according to this Ofcom study. Number 1, BBC One, 56% reach. 56% of the population get some of their news from BBC One. 41% from ITV. 34%, this is third place, Facebook. So Facebook is our third most popular source of news in this country. So not sure what it is in Australia, but you can see why this battle with the Australian government is so important. The Australian government basically wants to pass a bill that would make Facebook pay every time you clicked on a link to go through to a news article. Now, Paul Wallbank is an Aussie technology writer and commentator. We've had him on before. We've got him back to talk about exactly the same thing he was talking about last time, but it's moved forward a little bit. I don't get this. This is a marketing tool for newspapers, isn't it? If you want to share a story with your friends so you can discuss it, that is the beauty of Facebook. So why should Facebook pay for that? I mean, you click, You go through to the newspaper's website, you'll see their ads, you'll probably be asked to become a subscriber. Why would Facebook be paying anything for that?
Well, this is a really good question, and the answer is because Rupert Murdoch wants them to. That News Corporation has been on this, and you've seen this in the UK, and it's the same here in Australia, that this fight on the BBC, that it's stealing audiences. And of course, on the other side of the equation is that the social platforms and the internet platforms have been stealing all of their God-given advertising revenues.
But how is that happening?
Where this has come from.
Yeah, but is it not? I mean, it would be like me charging you if you were to go and recommend that to your friends that they should listen to this podcast. I'd be saying, yeah, you can recommend it, but I'm going to charge you for that. I mean, you can do that for free, by the way. Anyone who wants to promote this podcast to anybody else. I mean, it's completely turned the tables on the whole thing. How is Murdoch losing money because Facebook is pointing people to his websites?
Well, the truth is that this is the reason why you and I don't work for Rupert Murdoch. Is that this is the logic of Planet Murdoch, and it's the logic that the Australian government have brought into. And it's interesting. Overnight, Phil, the News Corporation globally signed an agreement with Google on putting their stories on the Google news feed, and this is in the media release that News Corporation in New York, not Australia, New York, put out. They thanked the Australian government, and specifically the Prime Minister, the Treasurer, and the head of the Competition Commission for their assistance in getting this happening for them. So this is really a shakedown operation by News Corp to get a few more dollars in the bank.
So the fact that they've now got that deal, because they have played ball, haven't they, on all of this, Google, because we thought maybe, they were threatening they were going to pull out of Australia, so that's not happened, quite the reverse. So now they're going to pay Murdoch some money for part of the Google News service. So that presumably exempts them from having to pay for the links, which is where where this law started. Or will they still have to pay every time someone clicks on a link in Google? So if I get a Google search result that comes back and says you need to read this in the New York Times, am I going to have to pay for it? Is Google going to have to pay for that link? Is that part of the deal?
At this stage, it doesn't appear they will. So let's backtrack a little bit on this. You said that this law was in front of the Australian Parliament. It was actually passed by the House of Representatives, our House of Commons, on Tuesday. Right. It's got to go before the Senate. So the Bunyip House of Lords in the next few months. Will it
happen? Will it get through the Senate? Because you have a system, don't you? Go to the Senate and then it has to get right. Okay, and if it doesn't get passed by the Senate, does that mean the law doesn't get passed, or?
That's right. If it doesn't get passed by the Senate, or if same as the House of Lords, if they come up with a bunch of amendments and kick it back downstairs, then it'll rattle around a little bit longer. But the interesting thing with it is, even if this law gets passed, the whole thing is at the discretion of the minister, or rather the Treasurer, our Chancellor of the Exchequer. And so this is the gun. It was described by one social media commentator as the gun in the Treasurer's drawer at the moment. So they can nominate any social media or web platform, or for that matter, any internet service, as being a carrier affected by this law at the whim of the Treasurer. So, it's a really wide-ranging, difficult law that has a lot of issues here. So what appears to be happening, though, is that Google has probably taken itself off the list, but Facebook now is really putting itself in the crosshairs of the Treasurer and the Australian government on what they're going to do next with this.
Do you think most Australians get what's going on here, though? Because I've been looking around on Facebook and seeing quite a few Australian posts who are blaming Facebook. Like, there's one here of someone saying that Zuckerberg advocates free speech, then he prohibits posting of anything from Australian media outlets. Now you can sort of see why, so people are saying he's hypocritical. There's a lot of people like that. The Zuckerberg is to blame in all of this. Nothing to do with the Australian government.
Yeah. Well, our government, like yours and like a previous administration in the United States, has been very good at playing the national card on this. So there's very much this thing of the nasty Mr. Zuckerberg has ganged up on Australia, and the good old Australians have got to stand up to this bullying. And it's kind of missing the point on this, that as you've said in the preamble to this that it just does not make sense charging Facebook for stuff that people share to the site. So yeah, but it really has resonated with Australians. It hasn't been helped, though, I've got to say, Phil, by the fact that Facebook have been a little bit clumsy with this. So they brought this in overnight, and what the block has effectively done is it hasn't just blocked Australian news sites, but it's blocked a whole bunch of health sites, government sites, the Bureau of Meteorology.
I saw that. Blocked. That's not great. Health sites in the middle of a pandemic. It's not great, is it? So
yeah.
If the Australian...
but to be fair to them, though, what they've done is they've tweaked their algorithm. And, of course, this is, as I said to a colleague of mine today, that this is the learning part of machine learning. That so you've changed the parameters of the algorithm and told it, okay, off you go and trawl the internet. We're probably going to see in the next 72 hours that it's going to get smarter. They're going to get smarter on what they're blocking and what they're not. So this is just a transition effect. So by Monday, we'll have a better idea of exactly what Facebook is going to be blocking. Right now, it looks clumsy. It is clumsy. It's a PR disaster for Facebook.
Zach Zerkup, who's the the Liberal leader for Western Australia, he lost all his posts. 4 weeks away from election, he lost all his posts. They're back now. He says he was zooked. Which is an interesting new lexicon, isn't it?
Yep.
So, I mean, that's an example of what you're saying. And then, all of those. And if I was a local authority, for example, and I wanted to post an article promoting a car boot sale at the weekend, I mean, would that have been zooked? I mean, that is overstretching it, isn't it?
Possibly, and it's really interesting on this, on what sites were taken down and what sites weren't. So one of the sites I'm involved with, they because they're an industry body, they weren't taken down. But then again, other government websites were taken down, and council websites taken down too. So it's really, it's a clumsy tool. But as I say, they're going to sharpen this up, and we will see by the end of the week. By the end of the weekend, exactly who has been blocked and who hasn't been blocked.
Do you think
we can?
Sorry, you go on. I'll edit it. Don't worry.
Okay, no worries. So what we're almost certainly going to see, Phil, is that the things like sites like the Australian, the Sydney Morning Herald, the Age, the big Australian newspapers will be blocked. And also for Australians, sharing overseas news will be blocked too. So I can't share, for instance, the Guardian or the New York Times if I'm sitting in Sydney.
I can't share the Sydney Morning Herald either. So it's a global ban on Australian publishers. So it works in all directions.
Yes.
So what about public broadcasters then? Because they blocked the BBC and the BBC. They blocked the ABC and SBS. I mean, if they were smart, actually, they'd say, no, you can see this news and you can't see the commercial stuff.
Yep. And that may be what happens over time. However, the way this law has been drafted is that there's a non-discrimination clause in it. So you can't discriminate against one news source over another. So you could argue that what Facebook are probably going to do is block all of the major Australian news sites on that non-discrimination. So they can go to the courts and say, hey, we're blocking all Australian news sites. We're not discriminating between the ABC or the SBS or any of the other sites, and we're not just picking on poor old Rupert Murdoch or the Nine Corporation.
So, do you think this is, first of all, is this going to go on for a while? Is Facebook in this for the long haul? I suspect they are, and if that's the case, are publishers going to take a revenue hit from this? I mean, I'm sure some people will leave Facebook as well, but are we going to find where the real strength is? Are publishers going to lose traffic that's referred to them, and are they going to lose advertising because of that?
This is going to be the really interesting experiment over the next few. So Australia is going through a real-time experiment on this. And this is the interesting thing for Facebook. And I would imagine that Google are watching this quite closely as well, because we will see over the next few weeks how this affects Facebook's numbers. And in a month's time, maybe Facebook will go up, maybe Facebook will go down. Equally, we'll see this with the publishers. I'm not convinced that Facebook's going to get too hurt on that. Over the years, I've been really interested in covering Facebook's problems that nobody ever leaves Facebook for these privacy issues or whatever. Whereas, the publishers, they suffer all the time on this. So I suspect the publishers are going to go on the losing end of this. However, we'll see in the next few months, next few weeks, I imagine.
Yeah, well, and then another chapter evolves. If they are seen as being all that powerful, then it does raise the question: are they too powerful? Is this going to demonstrate that social media has too much power? Are we at peak social media right now?
I think we are. I mean, this is one of the big tragedies for those of us in Australia watching this, that the big publishers are way, way, way too powerful. However, equally, the social media and certainly Google are way, way too powerful as well. So those of us that have been asked to take sides on this, well, we don't want to really take any side because all of them are way too powerful and too evil. But they're all bad guys. Yeah,
but it is good for independent. It is good for independent publishers, though, isn't it? I mean, if you're a small, how small do you have to go before you fall under the Facebook radar? So could you publish stuff on your blog and have that posted, or would that be blocked?
Well, this is the question that we're going to find out in the next few weeks, is that what is the definition of publisher, and how does this non-discrimination clause work for them? So, we may well see that the smaller publishers get out from under that. But again, it's difficult to say. But going back to the Google agreements, this is really bad news for the small publishers, because basically it's given a lot of money to News Corp and Nine and Seven West, who are the number 3 publisher in Australia. The Google agreement has been really poor for smaller publishers and media diversity, and in a country where media diversity is pretty poor to start with. For Facebook, we are really going to see over the next few weeks how that pans out. I have to admit, I'm not optimistic on this, but we will see.
Yeah, all right. We will indeed. Yes, as you say, a live experiment happening before our very eyes. Australia can be the test bed for the rest of the world. Good to talk. Catch you again next time.
The crash test dummy is the way.
There you are, the crash test dummy.
Okay, cool. Bye.
Paul Wallbank. I wonder, with now having an Australian on the programme, whether that means I can't post this on Facebook anywhere in the world now. We'll find out. That's it for today. If you've enjoyed it, then subscribe on whatever your favourite podcast platform is. Tell your friends as well. We could do with a few extra listeners, I'm sure. We don't know. We haven't looked yet. We daren't look to see how many listeners we've got. But hopefully it's picking up. And you can email me, phil@itsThe.business, if you'd like to get in touch. Or go to the website. You can leave a comment. You can actually, if you click on the contact section, then you can leave a voice message, and we can feature that in future editions of the podcast. That's it for today, though. See you on Monday morning. Have a great weekend.
It's The Business with Phil Dobbie. Listen online at itsThe.business or wherever good podcasts are